Go.
Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for coming to another edition of the OpenShift Commons briefings. We host these every Wednesday and we hope you bookmark it on your calendar. Come back and see us every Wednesday at noon. Today we're lucky enough to have Michael Ferranti, the Vice President of Product Marketing, here talking from Portworx, and he's going to be talking about enterprise data protection for OpenShift applications. Welcome, Michael, to the show.
Hi, Michael. Great to be here.
I'm going to stop sharing. Great. So tell us about what you do there.
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question. I don't know if some of your audience saw recently that we were just acquired by Pure Storage. So we announced that last week.
I was reading about that on the internet just the other day. Congratulations. That's a pretty good thing for you folks, I take.
Yeah, we're all really excited, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of those details as we go along, because I think it really relates to kind of our approach to the topic of today's conversation, enterprise data protection. All of that's to say, kind of, there's a lot of change. I've been with the company for 3 years now. And when I joined, I was, maybe the second or third kind of non-engineer hire. And we've since doubled the team many times over and are a much larger organization now, but going to be going into an even bigger organization. I think the way that I spend my time is a combination of talking to customers, understanding how they're approaching digital transformation within their organization broadly. How we translate that into requirements and solutions for solving the data problem that comes along with application development and application operations. And then making sure that when someone comes to our website or visits at a trade show or attends one of our webinars, that kind of how we solve the specific pain that they have is really, really clear. And in a startup, you end up wearing a lot of hats to do that, but that's kind of my mission.
And you were at another start, so you've been there for about 3 years now, you said. Where were you before
Yes.
that? You were at another startup. Were they also purchased?
No, no, and unfortunately not. So I'm not batting 100 on this one, but if you don't mind, I can kind of take a little bit of detour because I think it'll put a lot of the conversation in context. So I was at another startup prior to Portworx. It was a company by the name of Cluster HQ. And I spent about 3 years at that company as well. In fact, kind of as part of the acquisition by Pure, I recently wrote kind of a blog post reflection on the last 6 years in that journey and kind of what I learned along the way. And to give the kind of the high level overview, I would say that first of all, when I joined the previous company, Cluster HQ, I had been working in kind of a publicly traded company for the last 5 years and really enjoyed it, but kind of got the itch to join a startup. And for me, joining a startup, it's really about building something from scratch, right? Not just being on a winning team, but helping kind of get the team going so that it can win and really build things from scratch. And as I was looking around at kind of what startup to join, do I want to do something around, a SaaS company, or do I want to do something around, I don't know, neural networks that we're calling at the time, now we'd call AI. I kind of, just did a broad search and realized or noticed that everybody in San Francisco at the time was just like Docker, 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 Docker. It was Docker was the conversation at every infrastructure meetup anywhere. And as I learned more about it, I realized that, containers, yeah, that's kind of virtualization 2.0, but with that building block, that virtualization based building block, it was really changing how applications were being built, deployed, and managed. And I saw that as kind of a long-term trend. And so I said, okay, if this really becomes like if the data center and even the public cloud becomes predominantly containerized, what does that mean for the other parts of the application stack? What does it mean for infrastructure? What does it mean for security? And I realized that, kind of storage and data management writ large would need to be completely redone, reimagined, rebuilt if containerization was going to become the primary operating model.
Yeah, do
And
you,
go ahead.
I was just going to say something, you brought up Docker, and, I've been here at Red Hat for 19 years now and pretty happy about that. A great company to work for. But it seems like every 3 years there's a new golden child out there. Remember when OpenStack first came out and it was
Yep.
OpenStack, 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 and then there was the whole Docker craze, and then there was, what was it? Docker Con was the new, you know, place to be at, and then that kind of dwindled. And then there was containers and containers. Now Kubernetes is now the, orchestration of containers. So how have you, seen those changes as it relates to storage over the last, X number of years?
Yeah, yeah. Excellent question. And you know, I so not to make this all about kind of, my recent past, but 6 years ago when I joined this startup, I believe that if containers were going to continue to be important, someone would have to figure out storage and data management. And it turns out that maybe like 5 or 6 people agreed with me, and everybody else said, you know what, you know, Michael, we love you, but if you think that containers are going to run databases and analytics and other things like that, then you've completely missed the point of all of these Docker meetups, right? Containers are for stateless applications. And to answer your very pointed question, the evolution of storage and data management for containers was one of pretty much no one caring about it, and not even beyond not caring, being antagonistic towards the idea that we needed a data layer for containers to begin with, through to realization that, and we have lots of OpenShift customers that are in this boat. The agility that they gain from being able to run applications on OpenShift is so monumental for them. And I'm not even really being hyperbolic when I say that. It's really a game changer when you have a team that used to take 6 months to get a new application into production, and now with OpenShift they can squeeze that down to weeks or days, or in sometimes hours. That's such a big change that you say, how can we apply this to our entire infrastructure? And if there's a limiting factor, which is to say you can get that goodness as long as there's no data involved, then it's really a deal breaker, because how many enterprise applications don't have data? And customers began to realize that. Then the vendors, big and small, realized that they needed a solution there. And I was lucky enough to work for two companies that were there kind of 6 years ago. Portworx was founded in parallel with this other company, but none, the EMCs of the world were among the first, but it probably took them, a good maybe 18 to 24 months to really understand that containers was something that could challenge their business. NetApp was even longer. And now we kind of come full circle, and the biggest companies in the world who are using containers are also running analytics, AI,
Right.
big data workloads on containers in production.
And wouldn't you say, though, that because things are changing so rapidly and because containers offer so much flexibility and choice, that this poses new types of challenges for customers about orchestration and managing all of that in a production environment?
Yeah, absolutely. The playbook hasn't been written yet. I think it's not like everything is unknown at this point, but there are, still lots of unknowns, and oftentimes it's maybe there are fewer technical unknowns today, but there are a lot of cultural unknowns. For instance, and a lot has been written and said about this, is you used to have very rigorous separation of duties between developers and operations. And I think Red Hat was kind of one of the companies that really championed the system administrator, right? Your Linux admin. And that was an operational role. And now we kind of are in this DevOps world in which, you know, the administrator oftentimes writes software themselves. Now it could just be software in order to automate the deployment of other software. But in some cases, it's, it's everything from kind of lightweight coding to very, very heavy coding when you're building large scale kind of platforms. And that cultural change for how do you operate in a company that's, one of our customers, I'm just going to pick on them because I think it illustrates the point. They're one of the largest retailers in the United States. They've been in business for, over 100 years. And how do you take a company that's been around for so long, kind of started out not as a digital business, really as a brick and mortar, and then transform that into a company capable of delivering software to compete with true digital native companies, when you're also transforming your culture? I think you're exactly right. Lots of questions get posed.
And do you, as customers are starting to adopt multi-cloud and moving everything out of the data center, we see, I think we tend to see a lot of customers aren't necessarily moving their workloads into production right away. And I think probably a lot of that is about concerns around, data protection. So, how do you see protecting applications the way we used to do with, like, say, virtual machines, now that everything's running in containers?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I agree with you that, if you're adopting containers or Kubernetes or cloud native or whatever you want to call it, there's a learning period before those applications move into production, as there would be with any technology stack. And I think if you look at the industry overall, lots of like, you imagine each organization is on kind of an escalator, and everybody gets on at the same spot, but some people get on before other people. So, at any given point in time, even within the same organization, you have some customers or some teams that are in production, where you have other teams that are starting the beginning of the journey. And so that's kind of one of the things you have to deal with as well, which is that there's different levels of maturity even within the same organization. That said, I think when we talk to customers about data protection, we, a lot of things are new, but a lot of things are not new. And so customers understand concepts like, RPO and RTO when it comes to data protection. And just for, clarity's sake, RPO stands for Recovery Point Objective. That's, how much data loss are you willing to accept in the case of a disaster, right? If a write just happened in one data center, does that write need to be available in your disaster site? Or are you saying, it's okay if we have a backup from an hour ago, that's okay, that's an acceptable amount of data loss? And different types of applications have different requirements. In fact, in the same organization, you can have some with very, very stringent requirements and others that don't. And RTO is recovery time objective. How long should I recover? So we start with the customer's understanding, right? They have their RPO and their RTO for applications defined, and they've done that for VMs. And, like, the chief security officer, the chief compliance officer, head of IT, like, all of these things have been debated endlessly by the organization, and none of that needs to change just because you're moving to containers. What changes is how do you deliver upon those SLAs? And when it comes to Kubernetes and OpenShift, one of the most important things to understand is that an OpenShift application is made up of a number of different components, and all of those components need to be available in order for an application to run post-disaster or to be recovered from a backup. And those components are defined at the application level, not at the infrastructure level. And that's the big difference between kind of traditional data protection, where we would say we would back up our VM, right? We would use, Veeam, and that would back up all of our VMware instances. And because we ran one application per VM, If we had a backup of the VM, we also had a backup of the application.
Mm-hmm.
That model completely breaks down when it comes to containerization, because now my OpenShift application is actually running across many VMs. Or in the case of bare metal, it's running across many bare metal instances. I'm running distributed applications. And because OpenShift enables us to have kind of radical multi-tenancy, right, to get those efficiency gains, not only is a single application running across multiple hosts, but each of those hosts is hosting multiple applications. So I've kind of got this, this scatter plot of pods, configuration, volumes spread across my data center. And if I want to take a backup or recover an application, I need to know kind of the needle in the haystack for a specific tag or for a specific namespace. And the reality is that the biggest challenge with data protection when it comes to moving to containers is that your existing solutions that were optimized for VM workloads don't speak the language of Kubernetes and OpenShift. So you can't give them, for instance, a namespace and have them understand what that means and then go and protect it, or give them a tag and then they go and protect it.
Now, you folks have a Red Hat certified operator, right?
Yes.
So we've been working with you folks around, getting a container up and running, available for customers, so they know that, the internal components of that container are, Red Hat blessed code, as well as, supportable code from your side. How does the operator help people manage their data in this cloud native distributed environment?
Yeah, so the operator concept is basically software for managing other software. And so there are a lot of things that you need to do in order to kind of execute these operations. So for instance, if I want to take a backup, I might need to snapshot a distributed database. Maybe it's Cassandra and I have 10 Cassandra nodes and I need to snapshot them. But I need to do it in a way that actually runs a command within the Cassandra container, each Cassandra container, before that snapshot is taken, to kind of quiesce the database, flush any writes to disk, then take my snapshot, then unlock everything, and then run a command within Cassandra called node tool repair, which kind of resyncs any writes that were pending.
Yep.
Basically, it's a complex operation that something like an operator can do for you. So we have a rule within our backup engine, which is executed via an operator, which is a set of pre-hook, pre-snapshot rule and a post-snapshot rule. So all you have to do is say, for my custom database, you need to run this command from within the database container before the snapshot, and then you need to run this command after. It's the type of thing that a traditional database administrator would do manually. We've codified that into code. You give us the rule, and then our operator is going to execute that command. And it doesn't matter if it's, if it's on one pod, if it's on 100 pods, if it's once a day, or if it's every 5 minutes. We're going to be able to execute that faithfully and without kind of the human error that you can get from someone needing a second cup of coffee, and fat fingering a key or something like that. So the operator concept does not provide data protection. It enables software that does provide data protection to do so in an automated manner, and speeds up efficiency and reduces errors.
So what about customers? Like, what are some of the coolest customer cases you've seen out there today?
Yeah, it's there are a bunch, and unfortunately, the kind of the whole COVID thing has really put into stark contrast kind of companies that have been able to cope with just the unprecedented demand, and those that have struggled. And we're lucky to work with some very kind of forward-thinking customers that have been down this path for a while, and it just proved to be the prescient decision when kind of the when basically the world changed starting in February or March. So a couple of examples come to mind. One is a platform called Roblox. So it's a gaming platform. I think they have like 150 million monthly active users, mainly kind of teens and preteens. And so you can build your own games. It's a community. You can make money off of your game, like by selling games to other people. Kind of a DIY gaming network. And they've been a long time customer, and they talk about being the business of keeping kids happy. And with the whole COVID thing, their just usage has skyrocketed as kind of
I would
families
imagine
try to
so,
figure
yeah.
out, yeah, how to deal with kids in the house where parents are working and all those types of things. And so they've really had to grow what they call their points of presence, which is where they stamp out these infrastructures all around the world in order to meet the demand that's popping up. And so that's a really cool use case, being able to support that. Another customer that comes to mind is called Esri. So they're one of these companies that, like, we all rely on every day, but we've never heard of. They're
That's
the
the
largest.
Esri's mapping data, right?
Exactly, and they're
Huh.
becoming more of a household name, because some of their maps around COVID tracking are kind of often used by New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera. It's just to keep track of infection rates and testing and things like that using their ArcGIS platform. So you've
Yeah.
probably been to websites where it's
Yep.
arcgis.esri.com. And they're running all of that in the public cloud. And data is a huge part of what they do, so it has to be reliable, it has to be performant, it has to be secure, and we're helping there. And then those are kind of the not necessarily consumer, but things that consumers might be more familiar with. Then we have customers that are on the opposite side of the equation, financial services, pharmaceutical, where they're adopting containers and cloud native technologies like OpenShift in order just to make their business processes more efficient. And there, what's cool is how you take a really heavily regulated financial services company like Royal Bank of Canada. We recently did a webinar with them, and say, how do you both meet your kind of regulatory requirements of just being, a financial services institution, and be as agile as a Silicon Valley startup when it comes to getting to market quickly. Like, that's a hard needle to thread, and so being able to help their solving things like disaster recovery, multi-site DR for them, is really exciting. It kind of points to the future, I think, of you know there are fewer and fewer of applications that are really too sensitive, too regulated, too critical to running containers. I think we're seeing every day more and more instances where that's proving not to be the case.
Huh. So what about the cloud providers? It seems like, when I started at Red Hat, again, it was 2000 and 2002. There were 40 different flavors of Linux out there. Everybody was in the Linux space. There was Blue Dog Linux and Miracle Linux, and China had Red Flag Linux, and Red Hat was the company that got it right. Right, we figured out how to slow down the release cycles of the kernel releases so that customers could actually standardize on one distribution of Linux, and then software vendors could certify their software on a target that wasn't moving all the time. So we
Mhm.
we went from Red Hat Linux, which was version 6, version 7, version 8, version 9, and we came out then with a version of Linux that was released every 3 years before the ABI or KABI would change. Now with Kubernetes, it's kind of the similar thing. Like, everybody's in the Kubernetes space. Everybody's got a different story around Kubernetes, especially like the major cloud providers.
Mhm.
So who do you think's going to get it right? Who do you think's going to be the Red Hat of the Kubernetes cloud space?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think if I categorically knew the answer, I'd be on E-Trade right now, buying some stock, because I think the person who gets it right is going to really create a very hard to compete with business for a long time. Um, our CEO, Murli Thummarali, has actually been doing a series of blog posts on this topic, um, because it's both intellectually interesting and then also important to get right from a partnership perspective. Um, And so I don't know that, he knows the exact answer or we know the exact answer, but I think I have a model for thinking through it. And basically, I think that whereas Amazon pretty much got as close to a winner take all market as you can
Right.
in enterprise software, right? If they also didn't compete against a lot of their customers like retail and things like that, I think it probably could have been a winner take all market, right? Because if Walmart had decided to just go ahead and use Amazon because Amazon wasn't the retailer, then that would have taken some really big users away from Google and Azure, made it harder for them to get the scale that they needed. Anyway, Amazon was the runaway winner in the cloud 1.0 war. At the same time, VMware, I think, is still smarting from their business being sucked away because of cloud. And so you have a market now where the Google and Azure, and to a lesser extent IBM, but I would call IBM the fourth big cloud, where they're trying to figure out how do we prevent Amazon from running away with Cloud 2.0, and that's where you see Microsoft with Arc, Google with Anthos, IBM with Red Hat slash OpenShift as a infrastructure agnostic management layer on top of public cloud infrastructure. So if you're Google, you're thinking about how do we make it so that Amazon's strength, their infrastructure play, actually not a liability, but how do we commoditize that by bringing Anthos in, running on top of Amazon infrastructure, and Amazon basically has to keep eating margin because as they complete at the infrastructure level, but Amazon or Anthos captures or Google captures the higher value software revenue. At the same time, you have got the independent cloud platforms. There, I'll say like VMware with Tanzu, and then probably more relevant IBM and Red Hat OpenShift, where VMware can do the same thing. Tanzu gives them a credible way to really offer something of high value in the public cloud. Run Tanzu on a federated cloud architecture of Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, and used by least lowest common denominator infrastructure, storage, network, and compute from the cloud provider. But then your ELA is with Tanzu, and I think Red Hat can offer something similar. So I think ultimately there is not going to be only one winner in this market, the way that there was a very predominant winner in the public cloud. I don't know if VMware long term is going to be able to compete. I think each of the clouds will be successful, and then I think actually, I'm not just saying this because I'm on the OpenShift Commons webinar, but I think IBM's strategy is really smart, and Red Hat is like the entire key to it. OpenShift is the entire key to it, and so if nothing else, it's going to be really interesting to watch over the next 5 years, and customers have a lot of choice, which is a great thing.
And you can plug OpenShift Commons all you want. I mean, you are streaming live right now all around the world on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and a whole bunch of other sites. So if you wanted to say hello world to everyone, please be my guest. So what's next? Meaning, like, there was the OpenStack shiny object, Docker, we already talked about that. Is there going to be another shiny object 24 months from now, or do you think we're kind of settled into, Kubernetes and container orchestration for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think there's always a shiny object, and that's a good thing because smart people are getting born every day and they figure out how to solve problems differently. I don't think that at a high well let me say that I don't think there's going to be something in the next couple of years that fundamentally changes application delivery the way Kubernetes / containers have changed application delivery over the next 5 years. I think there's going to be innovation within that space. But the idea that there's something called X that 2 years from now, everybody's like, run away from Kubernetes and start doing that. I don't think that's going to happen in kind of the 3 to 5 year timeline. I think the next big thing, though, is going to be Kubernetes as the control plane for the entire data center, not just for containers. Because I think that that's been one of the things that's been holding back adoption of Kubernetes, which is that like you have to buy into containerization, or you have to commit, is probably a better word, to containerization if you want to get those benefits. But if you look at someone like Netflix, they made microservices popular before Docker was popular. And all of that, for the most part, was on Amazon. And all of that, for the most part, was running in EC2 instances. And they're a highly agile organization, lots and lots of microservices, and yet they weren't a containerized business. So if the idea behind Kubernetes is often said, how can we make any business like Netflix or like Google? Well, why are we still saying Kubernetes it can only manage a container? And we're starting to see things like OpenShift virtualization. We actually just did a blog on our website about how you can use OpenShift to manage VMs in the same agile manner. And I think once that happens, KubeVirt is a project that's being popularized. A lot of people are looking at ways to kind of get VMware out of their infrastructure, because it's not that we don't want virtualization, it's that we don't necessarily need, people call it the VMware tax. Like, I think that's, we don't need the value that VMware is providing for these set of applications. And so we want to do it with virtualization, but not VMware.
I think
as that
might
happens,
disagree with you though.
What's that?
I think VMware might disagree with you on that.
Yeah, I think they absolutely would, and it's their argument to lose. But customers vote with their checkbooks, and you can't take your customers for granted. Not that that's what VMware is doing, but I think some customers say, hey, KubeVirt plus Kubernetes, plus kind of Docker containers enables me to build an agile infrastructure that looks quite similar to what I was getting from vSphere, but I can do it in a multi-cloud. I can do it in the public cloud, and sure, they see some value there. So
what about these challenging times? Like I've been living here at my summer house now since March 20th, and when I first got here, I left Massachusetts because of the challenging times, and I was snowmobiling into my cabin here because the road's not maintained or anything. For me, my business of partner marketing here at Red Hat has just absolutely exploded. Like we are so busy working with various different software partners like yourselves and others. How have you seen these days where we are right now affect your business in a positive or a negative or in an indifferent way?
Yeah, it's I joke with my wife all the time, is like, whoever you think of being quarantined as, like, this is like, how are you going to make the time pass? It's going to be so boring. You can't do anything.
Yeah.
And as a family, we've never been busier, between, 2 kids in school, both of my wife and I working virtually. And you multiply that by every Portworx employee. Each Portworx employee interacts with, 100 different customers, and you keep multiplying it out, and everybody's busier. And if you look at like the things that are making modern life livable in this very unusual times, it all comes back to software. And so if you kind of say, well, what does that mean for software businesses? It means that there are a lot more customers, they're buying a lot more, they're running at scale a lot faster. There's a kind of I saw it on, I think it was on Twitter, maybe it was some other social media platform, but or maybe it was LinkedIn, doesn't matter. Like a little kind of mock survey, and it said, who in your organization has been responsible for driving digital transformation? And like choice A, CTO; choice B, CIO; choice C, COVID-19. And like that one's checked. Because the reality is, like, COVID, it was an adapt or die moment. And so, customers like Esri, like Roblox, experiencing growth that they hadn't planned for, and yet they had to adapt to, or just be surpassed. Zoom is another example, not a Portworx customer, but a clear example of a company that's just unprecedented. And I
I
think
think all
the
those, like Zoom, we use Blue Jeans here, but there's probably 5 or 6 major mainstream ones. I can't imagine the infrastructure demand that was put on those as a result of these last 7 or 8 months. It must be amazing.
Yep, absolutely. And my kids are learning about role-based access controls as they go through school, because they're authenticated into their school account using Google, using Google Auth, and all of these things. And like, they're at the tender ages of 8 and 10, are getting a level of computer literacy that just, I think, it portends of what the future is, where every major kind of life decision and life activity is going to be mediated by computers. That doesn't mean that we can't get together anymore, but that things that we used to do with paper, face to face, are increasingly going to go online, and all that infrastructure needs to run somewhere. It needs to be managed. It needs to be secure. And to bring it back to your earlier question, who wins? I think it's the companies that can make that easy and reliable for their customers, because that's ultimately what the end user needs. Is they need it to work right at any level of scale. And it's too complicated, even for people like you and me. We do this for a living. It still can be really, really complicated to understand how all the pieces fit together. And so you take a customer that also has a day job, doing banking or doing gaming or whatever their specific area of expertise is. They can't understand, every single piece of minutia. And so that's where, I think Red Hat really executed extremely well in the operating system revolution, by taking something as complex as Linux and just making it so that you plug it in and it works within the enterprise. I think application infrastructure is another example of that, where that need is equally high.
Hmm. Well, I'm looking at the clock. We're coming up here at the end of our content period here. We don't want you to go back after being here today and have your boss or your CEO say, "Michael, you were there. You were streaming on the OpenShift Commons briefing show, addressing people all over the world.
A
Why
global
didn't you
audience.
why didn't you say XYZ?" So let's make that not happen. What is it that you want to make sure that you deliver as a message here while we're here today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say the thing that I'm really excited about is, by joining Pure Storage. I don't know if the audience knows anything about Pure. I'm not going to do justice to their storied history. But I think the opportunity that Pure and Portworx have in the context that we've just described is that applications are more important than ever. Data is more important than ever. And those applications are running in multiple clouds and lots of different environments, and security is an ever-present threat. Availability is an ever-present threat or requirement. And someone has to provide that management layer, the data management layer, to live alongside kind of the application management layer provided by OpenShift, or whatever container platform you're using. And I think the best solution on the market for that is Pure and Portworx. And ultimately, the people listening get to decide. But we believe that if you are running serious applications on OpenShift, and you care about data protection, you care about performance, and you care about multi-cloud operations, that Portworx is the most complete platform for Kubernetes data management services. And I think getting a chance to work with innovative customers is what really makes us tick. really, really passionate about it. And so, looking forward to the next 6 years to complement the previous six. I think there's a lot of cool things in store.
Okay. Well, Michael, I'm going to pick up the screen sharing here if I can figure out how to do this. And going on to the resources tab, we took the liberty of putting up a resources link here, Michael, on how to get started with Portworx. The operator that you folks have that you built with us is made available and published and distributed via the Red Hat catalog. We have the link up there. And of course, OpenShift Commons, probably one of the most exciting things that I've had an opportunity to work with here at Red Hat. We also have a link to it there. If anyone would like to join the Commons community here at Red Hat, please feel free to do so. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really good.
My pleasure.
And we'll talk to you soon. And thanks for coming.
Great. Thank you.